Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening. Thank you for joining this NCEA webinar, Compassionate Discipline, How to Turn Compassion into a Benevolent Weapon Against Bullying in Your School. I'm Andrea Cobb, Manager of Educational Resources for NCEA, and I'm happy to moderate for you today. Before we begin, please know that all of your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions during today's presentation, please send those through the question box that appears in your GoToWebinar panel. To ask a question, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question using your keyboard, and then click Send. The webinar presentation will last about an hour, and there will be a question and answer portion at the end. Later this evening, you will receive an email asking you to complete a brief evaluation about the webinar. I thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. You will receive an email in the next 5 business days with instructions on accessing this recorded webinar, a certificate of attendance, and the presentation files. Let us begin as we do all things in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Now I wish to introduce our presenter, Jody Blanco. Jody is a New York Times best-selling author of Please Stop Laughing at Me and a nationally known speaker against bullying. Welcome, Jody, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, it's an honor to be here. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for coming. Today we're going to talk about compassionate discipline, and to give you a little bit of background on me, I am a survivor of bullying. From 5th grade through high school, I was the kid that didn't fit in. For the same reason, maybe some of your students struggle too, simply for being different. My school years were a nightmare, and I finally wrote about them in like 2000. I wrote Please Stop Laughing at Me. I decided to go public with my story, and thousands of kids from around the country started reaching out to me, asking me for help. So I started responding to those cries for help, traveling the nation's schools, sharing my story to motivate change. And that's what I've been doing these past 15 years. And today what we're going to talk about is compassionate discipline, because I learned a lot as a survivor of bullying, but also as someone who holds hundreds and hundreds of bullied kids and bullies in her arms in schools all over the world. So I'm going to share that knowledge with you today, and let's talk about compassionate discipline. First of all, bullying is not an act of hatred. It's a cry for help. And it's so easy for students, especially kids who are targeted constantly, to believe that that bullying is a personal act of hatred. It's not. There's no such thing as a bad kid. Only good kids coming out of bad circumstances. Traditional punishment doesn't work, because all you do with traditional punishment is you make an angry child angrier and an insensitive child more insensitive. Traditional punishment has got to be supplemented with compassionate forms of discipline that help bullies access their empathy and develop it like a muscle. If you are dealing with a student who's mean or unkind or cruel, be curious. The greatest weapon against bullying is curiosity. Curiosity leads to compassion. The more curious you are about a bully's backstory, the more compassionate you will become. And only until you truly feel compassion for the bully can bullying in your school ever be calmed or eradicated. It's a fact. I can give you an example, deeply personal, that I hope will bring this point home. At the apex of my bullying, when I was probably, I was in eighth grade, so 14 years old, and it was a very snowy day. And on that day, there was a group of kids, the popular kids, and they were making fun of a student with Downs, and I intervened, and they didn't like it. So that day after school, when I was coming out of school, waiting for my mom to pick me up, those same kids cornered me, threw me onto the ground, pinned me down, gathered snow and started shoving snowballs, freshly packed snow down my throat until I gagged and practically passed out. And then they ran off. The leader of the pack was a kid named Jerry O'Grady, and as you can imagine, he got into big trouble for that. He was suspended for 10 days. At the time, I felt vindicated. I thought, justice, that's what should happen. Bullies should be punished. Well, fast forward about 25 years, and I wrote Please Stop Laughing at Me. And as an aside, not only did I forgive the kids who tormented me at my union, but many of my former tormentors are part of my life, and they comprise an advisory council that I have. And every several months we get together and we talk about our past and what happened, and I use those insights in my anti-bullying work inside schools. So I was doing one of my, I would call them my bully dinners. I was doing one of my bully dinners, and one of my former tormentors who had been at that attack walked in and said, I just read your book and I feel terrible. And I said, why? He said, well, do you remember that night that we sort of attacked you with all that snow? And I gulped and said, yes. He said, well, after you left, we all went back to my parents' house for dinner, and Jerry was with us. And we were distracted, and when we came back into the kitchen, he had licked all of our plates clean. We had spaghetti, and there was spaghetti sauce running down his chest. And he said, and I thought at the time that Jerry was just being a smart aleck because he was the class clown and he used to pull stuff like that. Then when I read your book, I started putting the timeline together, and I realized, oh my gosh, that was about the same time that Jerry's dad lost his job. And there were like 7 kids in that family, and now that I think back, that kid was always hungry. Well, he didn't pick on the Down student or instigate that attack on me because he didn't like the Down student or he didn't like me. He did it because the poor kid was hungry. And what happened? The principal never asked him any questions. He didn't exert any curiosity at all. Instead, he just slapped him with a 10-day suspension because my parents were insisting. Slapped him with a 10-day suspension. Well, at least Jerry could share food with his friends at school, but at home there was no food, nothing. When he came back from that suspension, I thought he looked thinner, but I was a kid. I didn't think anything about it. And I always wondered why. Shortly thereafter, I was standing by the school bus waiting for the bus in the morning, and I felt somebody push me into moving traffic, and I turned and looked, and it was Jerry. I thought he was sociopathic. I thought he hated me, but it never had anything to do with me. The poor kid was hungry, and all that principal did by suspending him was subject him to further hunger. What the principal should have done is he should have been curious. He should have said, Jerry, you're a good kid. We care about you. What happened is so out of character for you. Son, what's wrong? How can we help? He should have asked his siblings, what's going on? He would have found out that that family was hungry, and he should have gotten food to those kids and then dealt with disciplining Jerry. But all he did was add cruelty to a kid that was already suffering. So compassion for the bully is the secret. You know, everyone assumes that intelligence is a derivative of intellectual ability, but it's not. True intelligence is a derivative of compassion. Without compassion, you cannot truly be intelligent, especially when dealing with kids. Now, I'm going to teach you about how to intervene with a bully. But before we go there, I want to talk about emotional credibility and the difference between emotional credibility and authority. Because everything I do, whether it's teaching educators how to intervene with a victim, a bystander, a parent, whatever the circumstance, emotional credibility is key. Authority is something that you are given by the state. Emotional credibility is when a child trusts you and feels safe opening up to you because they have faith that you are going to make promises that you will then keep. There are 3 primary tenets of emotional credibility. The first one is specificity. The more specific you are when you communicate with anyone, but especially a kid, the more validated they feel. And the more general you are, the more dismissed they feel. That's why kids don't like the expression, "we'll see," or "let's think about some things we can do," because it's too nebulous. And "we'll see," kids hate that because they know that's just dumb old grown-up speak for "I want to deal with this now, and I don't want to commit to anything, and please can I just have some peace and quiet." They know that, and so they feel dismissed. So what I train adults to do is, instead of saying "we'll see" when a kid comes to them for something important, that you say to the student or your child, you say to the child, "I can't give you an answer right now about this thing that you want, but let's meet tomorrow right here at the same spot at the same time, and I will give you my decision because I need to process it and I need to check with a few other people. But before we leave, can you tell me specifically, give me the specific reasons why this thing you're asking of me is so important to you? And I promise that what you share with me will play an important part in my decision-making process." Then the next day you meet the child again at a specific time and spot, and you give your reason. You give your answer of yes or no, and then you explain specifically why. Now you're giving yourself the same wiggle room as "we'll see" because you're not committing to anything, but by being specific in your communication, you're making this child feel validated instead of dismissed. And you're also teaching them the art of communication and the art of articulating their desires and why they have those desires. So it's a bundled lesson, so to speak, and the specificity makes them feel validated. Second tenet is immediacy vocabulary, and the acronym I use for it is IV, meaning intravenous support in crisis. If you're dealing with a kid in crisis, whether it's a victim of bullying or the bully, because remember, bullying is a cry for help. So both the bully and the victim are flip sides of the same coin. Both are crying for help. Both are caught in a cycle of the need for acceptance run amok, the desperate need for acceptance run amok. When you're intervening with a bully or a victim, they need to hear words out of your mouth that connote immediacy, like right now, today. I know this is important. We're going to address this today together because it's important to me too. Because that makes the child feel like an emotional priority. One of the biggest complaints I get, because I interview tons and tons of students, because I do a program where I travel to schools, largely Catholic, around the world, and I do a day-long anti-bullying program. I present to students, and then faculty, and then one for parents in the evening. And so I interview a lot of kids. And one of the primary complaints I get from students is that they don't feel like an emotional priority, that they'll go to the main office and need help, and someone will tell them, "Well, make an appointment with a counselor for later this afternoon or tomorrow." Look, I know there are some students that just seem to need attention all the time, and they seem to be overly dramatic and overly sensitive, but I want to share something with you about that. If there's a child that constantly needs attention, that is a cry for help. If there's a child that's overly dramatic, a drama queen or a drama king, that is a cry for help. It's not mainstream healthy, something's wrong. So even if it annoys you, even if it bothers you, if you're dealing with a bully or a victim, they need to hear words out of your mouth that make them feel like, we're going to deal with this right now, we're not putting it off because it's important to you too. It makes them feel like a priority. The third tenet is semantics, my favorite as a professional writer. Present it the way you want it perceived. Be aware of word choices, because here's the deal. Adults understand nuance. Like as I'm doing this webinar, and I might articulate something incorrectly, or I might, make a little oops in what I'm saying. You guys understand the nuances of what I'm trying to say. You'll get it. Kids don't think that way. Kids are neurologically inclined to be literal interpreters of their world. For example, when I was 5 years old or 6 years old, I was standing outside on the porch on a hot August day and I spilled some Coke. And my godmother came running out and she said, "Oh, Angel, be careful. Don't spill any more Coke. You'll draw bees." Oh my gosh, I was fascinated. The minute she walked away, I went running into the refrigerator and came back with more Coke and I shook it up and I dumped it onto the ground because you know what I thought? I thought, oh wow, the brown syrup is going to make a picture of a bumblebee. Why? Because in crafts for daycare, we had just done splash painting. What little kid associates the word draw with attract? So that's what I mean that kids are literal. So when you're communicating with a student or even your own child, think carefully through your word choices. If you have to hesitate, if you have to take a pause to find the right word, it's okay. There's power in silence. Learn to use that power to command a crisis circumstance. And we'll talk more about the 3 tenets of emotional credibility, but I'll illustrate them through example because I think that's more powerful. Here's the example. Mr. Steinberg versus Mrs. Sweeney. And I'm going to share with you a story about how 2 teachers handled a similar incident and why one teacher's approach was so brilliant. And see if you can catch some of the nuances and take notes. And at the end, I'll go through each point and let's see how many you caught. Mr. Steinberg, when I was a junior in high school, Mr. Steinberg was my English teacher and I adored him. He was a sweet old man and loved me. And there were these 2 girls in class that started saying these horrible things under their breath to me. So unspeakable, I can't even repeat them here. And Mr. Steinberg heard. And he immediately stopped the class and he stared them down and he said, "Ladies, principal's office now." And they skulked away to the principal's office and everybody giggled and I just wanted to crawl inside a hole and die of humiliation. Well, those girls got suspended for over a week. At the end of the suspension, they cornered me off campus. They were smart. They cornered me off campus, held me down, took a little bitty shard of like cement, and they cut my face. Now, I know Mr. Steinberg meant well. I know that he did, and God bless him, but he made the cardinal mistakes of what you should never do when dealing with bullying in a group situation. First of all, kids feel like everybody has control over their lives except them. Their parents, their teachers, their older siblings, and the bully child feels this even more because they're also controlled by the elite tormentors. There are 2 kinds of popular kids in a school. Elite leaders are the loving, caring, including members of the cool crowd. Elite tormentors are their unkind counterparts. They're the members of the cool crowd who use exclusion like a weapon. Beware, everybody, the elite tormentors in your classrooms. Sometimes they can have you fooled. They're often the kids that respect their elders, raise their hands in class, volunteer for community service, do extracurriculars with zeal. And nobody ever imagines that they're sending other kids home from school in tears every day, not by virtue of the overt acts of cruelty they commit, but more because of the friendship they deny. Well, when you're a bullied kid, the elite tormentors are controlling you too, so you feel like everyone controls your life except you. I didn't ask those girls to say those horrible things to me. I didn't ask Mr. Steinhardt to bust them in front of the class. I certainly didn't ask the principal to suspend them, and I definitely didn't ask for a permanent scar on my right. Yet all those things happened to me. All those decisions were made on my behalf, and never once did anybody even ask me my opinion. Now you understand what I mean when I say bullied kids feel like everyone is controlling their lives except them. Additionally, Mr. Steinberg, even though he meant well, committed 2 cardinal sins of anti-bullying in a group situation. Number 1, never chastise the bully in front of the class. Why? I know why we do it. I was a teacher for a long time, and I know why we do it. We do it because we think if we call out the bully in front of his or her peers, that kid will be humiliated and will never do that again, and the victim will feel empowered and supported. But you know what, everybody? That's adult logic. And adult logic only works with adults. When you're dealing with kids, you have to take your adult hat off and put on your kid hat and think like them. And in the world of kids, it's the opposite dynamic. When Mr. Steinberg called out those girls in front of the class, it was a mistake for two reasons. Number one, all he did was make them look cooler to their friends. When you have a group of elite tormentors picking on an established outcast and you call out those elite tormentors in front of their peers, you're not humiliating the elite tormentor, you're adding to the coolness factor. And you want to know what the conversation is by the lockers in between periods when there are no adult ears? Yo, dude, that was awesome, props. The person you are humiliating, the person you are making feel like they want to crawl into a hole is the victim. Because here's an insight. When you're a chronic victim of bullying, when you're an outcast, you're always in the limelight. Everybody's always staring at you and stalking you, looking for the next thing they can glom onto to make fun of you for. How you tie your shoes, how you pick up a fork when you eat lunch, how you did your hair, what color lip gloss you have on. They're looking for reasons. And now it's even worse because not only are kids putting other students in the limelight and looking for excuses to bully them, but they're taking photos of them on smartphones and then posting them on Instagram and Snapchatting them, and then everybody gets to comment. So the bullied victim always feels like they're in the limelight. So when Mr. Steinberg called out the bullies like that, I was the one who felt humiliated because I was back in that limelight and I just wanted him to turn it off. Mr. Steinberg meant well, but he was thinking like an adult in a circumstance involving kids. And that was where he went lovingly wrong. Now let's talk about Mrs. Sweeney. It was my senior year in high school, and she was also my English teacher, and there were these two girls in class, two different girls, who started threatening me physically, and they were scary, and she overheard. But she didn't chastise the bullies. Instead, she said, "Jody, dear, I need something out of the audiovisual lab. Can you help me?" So I walked out into the hallway with her, and I said, "Yeah, Mrs. Sweeney, what did you need?" And she said, "Oh, sweetheart, I don't need anything. That was just subterfuge. I heard what those girls were saying, and I'd love your opinion on how you think we should handle it." How brilliant is that? She made me feel like I had the right to participate in my own life. By asking me my opinion, she made me feel validated instead of dismissed. Additionally, and now we're looking at emotional credibility tenet number 3, semantics. By using the word we, by saying how we should handle it, she made me feel important in my own life. Now, we all know if Mrs. Sweeney didn't like my idea, she would do what she wanted to anyways, but by asking me my opinion, she made me feel like I had the right to control my own life. Now, you can imagine my answer. I said, "Mrs. Sweeney, forget it. Just leave me alone. Look what happened when Mr. Steinhardt got involved. Just leave me alone." And Mrs. Sweeney looked at me and she said, "Sweetheart, I can't do that. But here's what I'd like to do, and I'd love your blessing." Now, how brilliant is that? She asked me for my blessing. By using semantics, she managed to emphasize her emotional credibility without ever subjugating her authority. Let's really look at this. The word blessing and permission definitely don't mean the same thing. She couldn't ask for my permission because that would be completely subjugating her authority. But by asking for my blessing, she managed to reinforce emotionally her credibility without ever sacrificing her authority. That's what I mean about semantics, everyone. Think about your word choices. When dealing with a kid in crisis, it could make or break their rehabilitation and their being saved in the moment. You can imagine my response. Of course I said yes to what Mrs. Sweeney proposed because she was Mrs. Sweeney and I trusted her. This is what she proposed and this is what she did, and I'm going to walk you through it, and then we'll go back and we'll underscore why these particular actions were so inspired and enlightened. First of all, Mrs. Sweeney enlisted the support of an intervention partner, the math teacher. Now, the math teacher had these two girls second period. Mrs. Sweeney had them fourth period. The math teacher and Mrs. Sweeney approached the girls after sixth period by the lockers and said, ladies, we'd love to have a nice chat with you and maybe a cool beverage in the teacher's lounge. Come on, let's hang out for a little while. Now, there are two types of locations within a school, stigmatized and neutral. A stigmatized location is any location that kids subconsciously automatically associate with discipline or I'm in trouble. They include the principal's office, counselor's office, dean's office, etc. A neutral location is any location that feels safe, that they don't associate with discipline, like the nurse's office, the media center, the teacher's lounge, an empty classroom. Whenever you're doing an intervention, everyone, you always want to choose a neutral location, because if you choose a stigmatized location, by the time that student walks into whatever the location is, they've already erected a defensive wall. Neutral locations mitigate that defensiveness. So Mrs. Sweeney and the math teacher took them to the neutral location of the teacher's lounge. Once in the lounge, Mrs. Sweeney said to the girls, ladies, you are such good girls, and we are so blessed to have you as our students, and we really care about you. But we've noticed that you've been pretty rough on some of your other classmates lately. What's wrong, and how can we help? One of the girls broke down, and she said that a couple of weeks ago they were at her house after school, and her dad came home really drunk. Everybody in the town knew this guy. He was like the town troublemaker. Came home really drunk, got into an argument with her mom, and actually pulled out a handgun. The other girl called the police, and they came, and there were no bullets in the gun. It was all just a lot of drama. But this was back in the 70s, and these mothers told these girls, you must never speak of this outside of our home, outside of our families. So you can imagine where their angst was coming from. Mrs. Sweeney immediately got social workers involved. She immediately got both families the counseling and the help they needed. A couple of weeks later, she and the math teacher reconvened the girls in the teacher's lounge again. And she said, ladies, we don't know how you feel. We can't imagine what you've been going through. It must really be hard. And she let them vent. And then she said, it still doesn't excuse how you've been treating some of your other classmates. Now, the school isn't going to punish you because your circumstances have been punishing enough, but we are going to discipline you. She handed both girls a notebook and a pen, and she said for the next 10 days you are both individually going to go out of your way to perform one act of kindness each day for a different person. At the completion of each act, you're going to hand the notebook to the recipient, and who's going to sign it and date it. You're going to write a sentence in this notebook about the act that you did, what was the act of kindness. Then you're going to write a sentence about the recipient's response, and then you'll have the signature line where the recipient will sign it, date it, and provide a nighttime phone number. I want my first 5 pages in 5 days and my second 5 pages 5 days after that. And I'm going to verify compliance, that you honestly complied. If I find out that you fibbed about any of this, this will be your consequence. And it was harsh. She told them, if you lie, if you don't follow through on this, you will be mailed your you will be mailed your diploma, and you will not be allowed to participate in the commencement ceremony with your class. And you will be refunded the ticket for prom, and you will not be allowed to attend your senior prom. So you can imagine they complied. At the end of that 2-week period, one of those bullies actually approached me and apologized, and it was sincere. And the other girl, she is now a special education teacher and advocate here in Illinois where I live, working with the very types of students that when we were in school together, she used to make fun of in the hallways and call filthy retards. Now let's talk about what Mrs. Sweeney did that was brilliant. First of all, she didn't chastise the bully in front of the class. Rather, she used a diversion to extricate the victim out of the limelight. 2, she enlisted the support of an intervention partner, in this case, the math teacher. And I always recommend an intervention partner because sometimes things can get litigious with parents, and it's always nice to have another adult there for support and as a witness. 3, they approached the girls 2 periods after the bullying incident, thereby eliminating the possibility of glorification of the bully. 4, they brought the girls to a neutral location for the intervention, the teacher's lounge. 5, what's the first thing Mrs. Sweeney did? She complimented the girls. She made them feel validated on a human level. And 6, she exercised her strongest power, curiosity, like we talked about before. She was curious. She asked questions about what was going on, and then she helped the bullies. She answered their cry for help first. 7, you'll note that she never utilized the names of any particular victims, eliminating the possibility of targeted retaliation. Now, I know realistically that's not always possible. Sometimes you have to use the name of a victim, but wherever possible that it can be avoided, I recommend it. 8, she understood something that is the core of what I teach now in Catholic schools all around the world. She understood, like we talked about before, that traditional punishment doesn't work, that it only makes an angry child angrier. And so she did what I call compassionate discipline. And compassionate discipline is very simple. You are limited in its implementation only by the limits of your own imagination. All compassionate discipline is finding innovative opportunities for less sensitive kids to access their empathy and develop it like a muscle. And I'm going to give you some more examples of that. But what I want to emphasize is that when you're dealing with a bully, you want to answer the cry for help. You want to heal the wound, not punish the anger. Because if all you do is punish the anger and you don't heal the wound, creating the anger, the bullying cycle will escalate in your school because that's how human nature works, particularly with kids. The other thing Mrs. Sweeney did that was so brilliant is that she gave these girls a compassionate discipline exercise that lifted their spirits, and it lifted the victim's spirits because it motivated them on their own to apologize to me and other victims. That's powerful. Punishment can't, won't, could never achieve that. Let me give you some more examples of compassionate discipline just to sort of get your juices flowing, okay? Let's say that you have a group of kids at the school that we used in the 70s call the rich clique, but now I call them sort of the Abercrombie tormentors. There always seems to be a group of popular kids in a school whose parents are slightly more affluent and influential in the community, and they tend to lord it over other students, and they tend to look down their noses on kids who shop at Walmart and Goodwill instead of Pink, and they tend to exclude kids who wear hand-me-downs. It's sort of a class sort of issue. Well, what are you going to do with these kids? How can you punish kids for something they haven't done? How do you punish a group of kids for not inviting someone to sit with them at lunch, for not choosing them when dividing to teams, for not inviting them to a sleepover? Well, you can't, but you can do this. And these are just examples to get your creative juices flowing. Get an activity bus, get an adult chaperone from the school. Have the elite tour mentors go on a special field trip one day. And that field trip is to a nearby homeless shelter where this group of kids has to serve food to the homeless in the shelter. Each student in the group is required to interview at least one of the residents of the shelter and ask them about their dreams and aspirations and how they got derailed. And then that student, as part of an assignment, has to write a letter to that person of encouragement. Additionally, that same group of students has to come up with a way in which they, as a group, can make the residents of that shelter feel validated on a human level. Maybe it's painting a mural in the front hall with the art teacher one day, or putting on a talent show with the drama coach, but something that makes them feel validated. And I promise you, if you've got a group of kids at your school who are merciless towards their lesser fortunate classmates, if they're exposed to real people who truly have no one and nothing in this world, they are very unlikely to make fun of the kid who shops at Goodwill again. Here's another example of compassionate discipline, because I want you to understand how it works, okay? Normally I do this live, right, so I can see your faces, and at this point in the talk I always ask people to raise their hands and say, okay, who's a parent here? So I'm asking you to raise your hands and sort of psychically intuit to me who are parents here. I have a feeling that some of you, a great deal of you, are parents here. So this is sort of also communicating to you as parents, because we all know that in today's school environment, a lot of parents are expecting teachers to do a lot of the parenting to begin with. And I think that when you're a parent and a teacher, your love of kids is sort of universal. So this is a little extra tidbit for you as parents on how compassionate discipline can work at home. What's the one thing that we want for our kids more than anything? We want them to experience unconditional love, to know what it's like to be loved unconditionally by someone other than we, their parents. Well, in order to be the recipient of unconditional love, you have to have tolerance and compassion in your hearts. And tolerance and compassion are not qualities that you can command of a child or punish into a child or preach into a child. They are qualities that must be inspired by example. Now, there's tons of ways to inspire compassion and acceptance and tolerance into a kid, but I'm going to give you one that's sort of a favor I do for St. Francis. You see, I'm a big animal lover, and so I made this promise to St. Francis when I started this whole thing a long time ago, that at least once, every webinar, every presentation, wherever I am, I'll communicate an idea that will also help animals. But again, this is just to get your creative juices flowing. Let's say that you're a parent and you're home at night and you overhear your 13-year-old daughter on the phone, and this is what you hear. Like, oh my gosh, I am so not inviting her to my party on Friday. Like, ew, this party is going to be so incredibly Gucci, and like she would just like totally ruin it. Like, ew, as if I am totally not inviting her. And then you find out later that that girl, your daughter, is so not inviting, used to be your best friend since first grade until the cool crowd started coming around. So your daughter is like an elite tormentor in training. She's not an elite tormentor yet. She's just trying it on like a sweater. But you don't want that sweater to become a permanent part of who she is. So what do? Punishment doesn't work. I mean, traditional punishment just teaches kids that in order to get what you want, you have to do something for it. Be nicer to your grandparents or I'm taking away your cell phone. Okay, so now you're nicer to your grandparents, but That's a bum deal for the grandparents, because it's not because you feel any deeper love for the grandparents. It's because your son or daughter wants their iPhone back. I mean, where's the lesson of love there? Where are the core Catholic values there? So let's say you overhear this conversation. Well, one of the things you can do, animals are a great way to teach kids tolerance and acceptance. Sit your elite tormentor in training down and explain to her what can happen to animals at shelters who no one adopts. Then as a family, go to a nearby shelter and say to the manager, our family would like to adopt the next animal scheduled to be put down because no one else wanted it. When the manager says, well, don't you want to walk up and down the rows of cages and pick a pet? You say no, because you don't want to reinforce that example of conditional love. You don't want to pick a pet the same way your son or daughter picks who's cool enough to come to their sleepover or who's awesome enough to sit with them at lunch. You want to set an example of unconditional love. And when that manager brings out that pet, I do not care if it is a bald, toothless, flatulent, three-legged dog. You wrap your arms around it and you give it love and affection, and you make your child bear witness to the transformation that occurs when a spirit who's been dismissed and abused and forgotten the same way your son or daughter may be dismissing, abusing, or forgetting his or her classmates finally gets the acceptance they've been longing for. Compassion, acceptance, tolerance, whether you're trying to teach it to your own children at home or you're trying to impart it to your students in a class, must be done with compassion. They must be exposed to circumstances that tug at their hearts and make them feel empathy. Only then is bullying going to be curbed. If you make a bully angrier and more desperate, you don't answer their cry for help, that cry for help becomes an angry outburst. To give you one other example of compassionate discipline and how a remarkable school witnessed it and kept it alive. Several years ago, I was doing my student presentation at a middle school, and these presentations are intense. The middle and high school presentation is 90 minutes, and I actually relive my past with these kids. I bring them back. And normally afterwards, I have to do interventions. Half the kids who come to me in tears are victims seeking affirmation, but the other half are elite tormentors who never realized their behavior was cruel until they heard me speak. So one day, I'm done with my talk, and this sweet girl comes up to me in tears, sobbing, and I hug her and I say, oh, sweetheart, I know what it's like to be bullied. It's going to be okay. And she looks at me and she said, oh, no, I'm not bullied. No, no, no. I'm the most popular girl in my class. And me and my friends have been pretty mean to this kid since 5th grade. And we want to tell him we're sorry, but we're scared. Can you help us? So I immediately called the principal in, got the name of the child, got a classroom. And when I told the principal the name of the child who was being bullied, Eric, he gave me this strange look, but he obliged. So I have about 18 kids, and you can tell they were the most popular kids at school. You could tell they were the ones that everybody wanted their acceptance and approval. And we were in a classroom, and the principal comes to get me and says, Eric is in the hallway, and he introduces me. And when I met Eric, I got it immediately. It was clear he had severe Asperger's. He had tics. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stuttered. He had trouble sustaining contact. And I whispered in his ear, I said, Eric, I said, some kids who have hurt your feelings, they want to tell you they're sorry. Would that be okay? He said, okay. So I escorted him into the classroom where he faces his tormentors of 3 years. And he says into my ear, before they say they're sorry, could I maybe tell them something? And I said, sure. And that 14-year-old boy stood in front of his tormentors and he said, I know you think I'm weird. It's because I have something, a condition called Asperger's, and it makes it harder for me to make friends. And then he looked at them and he said, but you know how in homeroom, when the teacher's not there, and you bang the erasers against the chalkboard, they had chalkboards in high school, really, really hard, and it makes that loud noise. And a lot of times I screamed and I started to cry, and like once or twice I had an accident and you all laughed at me. And of course, his bullies are wide-eyed and silent. He said, well, that wasn't because of my Asperger's. That's not why I did that. He said, when I was in the beginning of 5th grade, my mom went to the store and my dad was taking care of me, and he said that he didn't want a retard for his son anymore, and he got out his gun and he put the gun in his head and he died. Well, of course, I couldn't even speak. The principal was equally speechless. And I hugged Eric because he was crying at this point, and I hugged him. And the girl who initially approached me stood up, and all the other kids stood up, and they wrapped their arms around Eric and they hugged him. And from that moment on, they begged him for his forgiveness. And from that moment on, he sat with them at lunch every day. They helped him with his homework. They even helped him make the basketball team. I mean, did he ever make a basket? Not without a lot of help. But they made him feel loved and accepted. And what's remarkable about this story is that school could have punished those kids. They knew nothing about the eraser thing. They could have punished them. They could have done something, but they didn't. Instead, they celebrated the courage and compassion of the bullies and the victim, and their willingness to forgive, overcome, and work together. So I share that story because when I go into schools, I see stories like this all the time. I witness them all the time. And I learn something about the human heart, not just kids, but the human heart. I once heard the phrase, how can you open a heart that isn't already partially broken? The bully has a broken heart. It's broken. It's broken open. You can get in there, but it's not going to be punishment. It's going to be with forms of discipline that help them develop their compassion. And we have to teach the victims to have compassion for the bullies instead of just seeking punishment. One of the biggest mistakes adults make when dealing with bullying is that when there's a bullying incident, the whole entire focus is on appropriate punishment for the bully. Meanwhile, the victim is dying of loneliness and no one's tending to that, and the bully is just being made angrier and more resentful. We need compassion for both. When I do my elementary school presentation, one of the primary messages I teach is tattling hurts, telling helps. I tell kids of all ages, but especially the elementary schoolers, because I want them to know early on. I tell them, when a bully is mean to you, it's not because the bully hates you. It's because something else in that bully's life is making them angry and afraid and hurt. And they're bringing all that pain to school and they're taking it out on you. When you tattle on a bully, that's just because you want to get that bully into trouble. You're really, really angry and you just want to punish the bully. And that's about revenge, and that's wrong. Telling, on the other hand, helps, because when you tell on the bully, the teacher can answer the bully's cry for help, and the teacher can make the bully stop hurting others. Tattling hurts, but telling helps everyone. And lastly, curriculum enhancements. I skipped that before. I want to address that really quickly. You can impart vital life lessons in the classroom through required lesson plans. For example, if you're a social studies teacher and you're giving a quiz, you can incorporate a question about fairness or tolerance into a social studies quiz. If you're a science teacher, I once gave a workshop, and one of the examples I gave, I said, let's say you're a science teacher and you're teaching the kids about the food chain and you give a quiz. Question number 1 might be, who invented the food chain, the concept, and why? Question number 2 might be, what was the scientific community's initial response to the food chain? Question number 3 might be, if the social atmosphere at this school were the food chain, where would you fit on the food chain and why? A question like that, delicately interspersed into an academic activity, will give you insight about the student, the classroom, and the school as a whole. I had a science teacher put that question on a quiz, and the 7th grade boy who answered it talking about how he had a knife in his locker and he was going to use it on all the kids who were being mean to him. It enabled us to intervene, help this child, get him the counseling and support he needed, and perhaps save the lives of the kids he was targeting because there was a knife in his locker. So think about your homework assignments, think about your quizzes, think about what you're teaching, and think about ways in which you can incorporate assignments that make the information more specifically, there's that word again, personally relevant to the students. Make them connect whatever it is to their own lives and their own care, their own behavior. Make it real for them on a personal level. And you can include a lot of lessons this way, not just anti-bullying life lessons, but lessons about civic responsibility, tolerance, self-respect, whatever you think is important. Approach your required curriculums from a new creative place and say to yourself, okay, I'm giving a quiz today. How can I incorporate a question that will help these kids connect more personally with this material and connect their characters more personally with this material? And lastly, practicing what we preach. You know, kids are sponges, right? And they often become interpreters of what's going on in their world, and they act out. So for example, when I go into schools and I see a high incidence of bullying, it's often because there's bullying among the faculty. Bullying just isn't relegated to kids. Sometimes there can be faculty cliques. Sometimes faculty members can bully other colleagues. So if you're in that situation, if you're being bullied by a colleague or an administrator, or you feel excluded by a faculty clique or something like that's going on, let's practice what we preach. Be curious. If a colleague is being abusive, be curious. Ask them what's going on. Find out as much about that person's story as you can. Maybe they're going through a divorce or a difficult time. Lead with truth and lead with compassion. Treat each other with respect and love and compassion, and that vibe will trickle down to your students. Remember, you don't just teach, you inspire. And the way you inspire is by your own example. Now, does anybody have any questions? Andrea, take it away.
Thanks, Dodie. We had a question about dealing with parents. How do you justify the compassionate discipline approach versus traditional punishment to a parent who feels like their child has been victimized?
That's a whole other webinar. I have a webinar on how to deal with parents who bully the school. But my approach is always very simple. Number one, usually parents of victims and parents of bullies, all parents fall into a few different categories. There's something called the adult survivor of peer abuse. The adult survivor of peer abuse is an adult who was either bullied when they were in school or just sort of invisible and excluded a lot, and they've never come to terms with it, and they carry those wounds into their adult lives. So sometimes if the parent of a victim is an adult survivor, they can way overreact to a situation because they're reliving their own resolved issues in this circumstance. So the first thing I always recommend is, again, my favorite word, curiosity. When a parent comes in enraged because their child is being bullied, talk to the parent. Ask them questions about their own school experience very subtly and say, you know, this situation is troubling and we really want to handle this well. I'd love to know about your school experience. I mean, were you bullied or were you excluded or were you popular? Talk to me about your school experience, because in those experiences we may find some wonderful insights together. And get them to talk about their own school years so you can identify right away if they are adult survivors of peer abuse or not. And if they are, you need to lovingly, gently call them on it and say, I see that you had some experiences in school that were very difficult, but it's really important that we separate what happened to you and what's happening with your child now. It's very important we keep them separate, and gently, lovingly guide them through that process. Second, when approaching the parent, say to the parent, we have something in common. You know, we truly love and care about your child. and we have something in common. We care about your child. And the bully who's done this to your child, we need to find out what's going on. Tell them straight up. Cry for help. What happened to your child isn't because that bully hates your child. Something is going on. It's a cry for help. Or if it's a group of kids, the ringleader, it's usually a cry for help. So I often suggest that you tell the parents straight, let's address this with compassion. And then, I mean, this is a whole webinar, but in a nutshell, then you tell the parent, the tenets of emotional credibility work with difficult parents too. So sit the parent down and say, number one, let's define the challenge together, and then jot it down. Make sure that the parent's definition of what's happening and your definition of what's happening are consistent, and then write it down. And then say, let's come up with a 3-point plan of action together on how to address this situation. And you're dealing with the parent and the victim, a 3-point plan of action, and then discuss the verbiage and write it down. And then say, okay, this is our plan of action. I'm going to type this up and get it to you, and I'll give you an update every week or so on what's going on. And if you give the parent something to do with their own child, like an esteem building exercise, let's get your child involved in something outside of school where they make new friends with new faces. Let's deal with your child's needs first before the bullies. Yes, we'll approach the bully. We'll talk about that in a moment. But first, your child is the priority here. Let's deal with helping your child through this. Because the victim's loneliness is usually what most bullying victims, if they are driven to suicide or other desperate acts, it's not because of the bullying, it's because of the loneliness and the isolation. So get the parent of the victim focused on dealing with their own child's needs first, and then segue to the bully. That will mitigate some of the parent's rage, and then say, curiosity leads to compassion. We need to find out what's going on with this bully. This is a cry for help. We need to answer this cry for help, and then we will exercise compassionate discipline and explain to them what compassionate discipline is. We want a disciplinary act that not only is a form of discipline, but that helps them be kinder to your child and to the rest of the kids at school. So I find also that if you are specific with the parents, and the other thing that really drives parents nuts is if a parent calls and their child is being bullied and they're freaking out, and someone says to the parent, okay, why don't you come tomorrow and we'll have a meeting. The same emotional credibility tenets apply. Immediacy vocabulary. Don't let a parent fester. If they're angry or they're freaking out, deal with it as immediately as possible, because the more you let them fester, the worse it's going to get. So number one, be specific and work with the parent in partnership on a plan of action first to help their child get through this. That will soften them. Then, after you've come up with that plan of action and written it down and are comfortable with it, then tell the parent about compassion, and we have to find out what's going on with the bully, and we'll come up with a form of discipline that not only is discipline, but that helps the bully access their empathy so they can be kinder to your child and to all the students. And again, do it immediately. Don't let a parent fester. And third, semantics. Be aware when you talk to parents of the semantics. Don't use the word problem, use the word challenge. Don't use the word solution, because that suggests there's a solution. Sometimes situations don't have solutions. Use the term plan of action, because that makes the parent feel as if they're working in partnership with you. If they feel as if they're working in partnership with you, they will be much more open to the idea of compassion for the bully than if you just tell them, we're going to handle it, and then you never give them any specificity. Parents are big kids, and when a parent comes in freaking out, imperious, or acting as if you work for them because they pay a tuition, remember, all of those emotions that are off-putting and obnoxious are secondary. Fear is a primary emotion. And the best advice I can give you in dealing with a parent is, if you can remember the reason this parent is being so offensive is because they're terrified. If you can remember that, you can navigate through. Does that help?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you so much for that. We have another question about making a student an emotional priority when you're in a situation where you legitimately are unable to stop what you're doing. If you're in the middle of supervising other children or there are multiple situations going on, how can you make a student feel like an emotional priority in those limited time moments?
First of all, you have to have a system in the school for dealing with an immediate crisis, and it's your semantics. So let's say, for example, you're in that situation and a student comes to you with a crisis, okay? The first thing you have to say to that student is, you have to take a moment to talk to that student, no matter what. You have to take a moment. And you have to look the student in the eye and you have to say, thank you for coming to me. Thank you for opening up to me. I know how much courage it took and I'm so proud of you. This is a priority for me. This is really important. This is really important. I have to take care of this right now, but you are very important to me. And then you have to have a point person in the office or in the school that you can send the student to and say, I want you to go to so-and-so, and I want you to breathe and take a time out and breathe, and I will be there as soon as I can. And normally what I recommend to schools is the school nurse is good. Sometimes it can be the librarian, but there has to be a safe haven in the school, and you have to use your discretion. I mean, if it's you know, somebody stole my pencil, you can just be honest and say, okay, we can address this later today. But if a student is really in crisis and your hands are tied, you have to have a protocol that you can set somewhere that's a safe haven. Because I cannot tell you, I keynote a lot of suicide conferences. And I've had a lot of parents and a lot of educators come to me who've lost kids to bullying-related suicides. And often there was that moment where that child could have been saved, but because of that very situation you described, they weren't. So you have to have a system set up in the school somewhere that's a safe haven where that child can go, if for no other reason, so they can be monitored so they can't hurt themselves.
Thank you. What tools can we give our students or children to help them deal with situations of unkindness and bullying when an adult is not immediately around?
What I always tell kids, what I always tell kids is, number one, the cliches don't work. So as adults, I'm telling you as adults, cliches like ignore the bullies and walk away, they're just jealous, leave them alone and they'll leave you alone. Those cliches don't work. You cannot use them, especially ignore the bullies and walk away. And the reason it doesn't work is, first of all, what's the one thing we tell kids everywhere? Don't be a bystander. If you see somebody getting made fun of, defend that person. Then why is it we'll turn around and say to that same kid, oh, but you're the one being bullied, just ignore it and walk away? Isn't that a mixed message? Aren't we in effect asking that child to be a bystander in his or her own life? Stand up for others, but don't stand up for yourself. Additionally, again, I cannot emphasize this enough, you cannot think like an adult and superimpose adult logic into adolescent circumstances and kid circumstances. You've got to take that adult hat off and put that kid hat on. And in the world of kids, the more you ignore the elite tormentor or the bullies, the more you ignore them, the meaner they will get until they elicit a response. So the advice of ignoring them and it will stop actually has the opposite effect. That only works with adults. It does not work with kids. So what I always tell kids is that, number one, little kids, I tell them that they have to push their compassion button. I show them where that is. That's the whole thing I do with kids. And they have to turn on their compassion and turn off their anger. And they need to look the bully in the eye. And for older kids, I give them a more sophisticated version. Basically, you have to look the bully in the eye and tell them to stop. And that violence doesn't work, obviously, but you have to look them in the eye and tell them to stop. And I also tell kids to be curious. It's okay to disarm a bully. It's okay to look at a bully and say, gee, Are you okay? Because you're a really nice person and that was really mean. Is anything wrong? Can I help? You'd be surprised how effective that can be. And I also tell kids, as we talked about before, tattling hurts, telling helps. And it's really important that we encourage students to tell out of compassion and not out of a need for punishment to be implemented. And lastly, when dealing with kids, here's the single biggest mistake that adults and teachers make, that adults in general make when dealing with bullying-related situations that lead to more bullying-related suicides than any other action. You find out a child is being bullied or just feels invisible. That's the other form of bullying, just the invisible student. But either way, you find out and you immediately spring into action. You know, you put your whole heart into it because you love the student. So you're dealing with the parents of the victims, you're setting up a meeting with the parents of the bullies, you're dealing with the administrator, the school psychologist, and you focus on an institutional level on punishment for the bullies because the parents of the victim typically bully the school into punishing the bullies, which I think is so ironic anyways. So the whole focus is like this institutional focus on punishing the bullies. Meanwhile, on the other side is this victim who's bleeding spiritually because they are desperately lonely. And as I said before, most bullying victims are driven to desperate acts like suicide, not from the bullying. It's the loneliness, the isolation, the feeling that they have no one to tell their secrets to and nobody understands them. And believe me, everybody, I know because I was that desperate child and I hold hundreds of them in my arms every week. The first thing you need to do when dealing with a bullied child is perform triage. You need to help that child identify a brand new social outlet where they can make new friends with new faces. I recommend doing a little research. The Park District, libraries, chambers of commerce, drama clubs for kids, dance studios, martial arts studios, one neighborhood away, one parish away, and printing out what you find and making little packets and keeping them in your desk. And when you do an intervention with a victim, and I have a whole intervention system, but fundamentally, when you do an intervention with a victim, go through this list with them and ask them if there's anything they'd like to get involved in. And then the other part is motivating the parents to get them enrolled, because the first thing you need to do is tend to that bleeding victim and ameliorate their loneliness. Then you can focus on how to handle the bully. And when you're focusing on how to handle the bully, it's got to be with compassionate discipline, because once that bully's cry for help is answered, they will stop abusing the other kids. But unless you do that, the cycle will just accelerate.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, there sometimes is sort of an anxiety about being labeled as a school with a bullying problem. How do you differentiate at the school level what is bullying versus just someone's not being nice that day? Can you kind of define bullying and tell us how that would work?
Sure. First of all, that question has two parts to it. Number one, there's no such thing as a school without a bullying problem. Bullying is an organic passage of life. Why? Like I said before, bullying is not about targeted personal hatred. Bullying is about a cry for help, and it's about the desperate need to fit in, run amok. The bully and the victim are flip sides of the same coin. Both are desperate to fit in because it's how they define themselves at that age. Both are desperate to fit in, and they end up assuming different roles within that dynamic. By the way, the typical profile of the bullied student is what I call the ancient child. The ancient child is the student who's an old soul, who's compassionate beyond their years, who typically has a much richer command of vocabulary than their peers, who's more intellectually and socially sophisticated. So everybody assumes these kids are more emotionally mature, but they're not. They're still just as driven by the desperate need to fit in as any other kid. Every school has bullying because it's a part of the adolescent passage into adulthood. It's how you deal with it that makes a difference. So I always tell schools, position yourselves as proactive. It's not that we have a problem, we are proactively supportive of all of our students. And as far as defining bullying, when there tends to be a bullying incident at a school, all the adults gather and the administrators and they launch an investigation and they're trying to define what's bullying and what's not. And I always think that that's so silly because you don't define bullying based on the intentions of the perpetrator. You define it based on the experience of the recipient. So if you have a girl making fun of another girl, and the bully says, well, I was just joking around, I was only teasing, that doesn't make it not bullying. If that recipient experienced emotional unease or felt emotionally or even physically unsafe, it's bullying. Bullying is defined by the experience of the victim, not by the intentions of the perpetrator. And that's an important distinction because sometimes kids can be joking around, they don't think they're causing any damage, and only when we tell them honestly, when we lead with truth and compassion and say, you may not have meant to bully her, but you hurt her, that is how they become more compassionate. You're not born compassionate. Compassion is something that is developed. You may have the core capacity, but it has to be developed. And only with truth can compassion be developed. And bullying is defined by the truth of the recipient, not the intention of the perpetrator. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought for those in our audience who are looking for additional resources about bullying. Do you have any recommendations for where they can go?
Yes, absolutely. For one thing, just to say this, you know, I speak in schools. I do a day-long program. If any of you are interested in bringing me into your school, you know, shoot me an email. I do it all the time, and it's a very easy process. Also, if you're dealing with a situation and you just need a sounding board, you need an objective sounding board because you're just confounded by a circumstance between some students, shoot me an email. Reach out to me. I'm responsive and I care, and my relationship with the NCEA is such that you guys are all a big priority for me. And in terms of additional resources, my website is jodyblanco.com, but above and beyond those resources, I know this may sound silly, but find every opportunity you can to expose kids to events and experiences that open and deepen their compassion. So resources, Netflix, research movies in which, you know, animal movies are great, like where animals, you know, they suffer a little and they triumph and you feel compassion for the animals. Movies like How the Grinch Stole Christmas with Jim Carrey, where the whole reason he became the Grinch is because he was bullied. Show that to the school at Christmas time and then discuss it and have an assignment and some activities that relate back to what happened and is there anything like this at our school that you can relate to. Kids respond to movies. Use that. Other resources, music. Kids respond to songs. Make it your business to know what are the top 20 or 30 songs that your students are listening to. What are the lyrics? Are there any lyrics that relate to compassion, empathy, tolerance? Play the song over the speaker. Make it a school-wide activity to talk about the lyrics and the song and its impact. Your greatest resource is your own imagination and what the kids are into. Remember, we talked about curriculum enhancements, and we talked about finding ways to make required subject matter specifically, there's that word again, personally relevant to your students. A great way to do that is to pull in cultural interests that they covet, their songs, their music, their movies, the celebrities they like. You know, if your students all like Taylor Swift, research a little bit about that. Find a story about something she did or something she went through. Make it relatable to your students because Compassion is the key. And like I said, tend to the wound. Don't punish the anger in a bully. And if you do that, victims will be inspired to be compassionate as well. It is the only hope and the only solution.
Well, before we conclude today's webinar, I invite all of you to visit our website at ncea.org to see listings for both upcoming webinars and other professional development offerings. I know Jody will be in our lineup again, probably multiple times this school year, so stay tuned for her. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and thank you, Jody, for sharing your expertise and your passion and your experiences with our membership. It was very powerful. If anyone has additional questions for Jody or interested in her work, you can reach her at jody@jodyblanco.com. As a reminder, we will be sending you this recorded webinar and the presentation slides via email within the next 5 business days. Any last words for our audience, Jody?
Yeah, thank you for loving kids. Thank you for dedicating your life to them. And I know how hard it can be and how thankless it can feel sometimes, especially dealing with parents. But realize that the small things you do and say could save a life, and you may never ever know it. But you're not just educators, you're guardian angels of these kids' futures. So on the days when you feel burnt out, on the days when you don't feel like facing a classroom full of kids, realize that for some of them, you're all they've got, and allow that to fill you when your cup is empty.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you again. May you enjoy a blessed evening.